Let me tell you something about the moment you realize a person you welcomed into your family has decided, quietly and deliberately, that you no longer belong in your own life. It does not happen with shouting. It does not happen with a dramatic confrontation in the middle of the living room while everyone stares and the air goes electric with the particular charge of things finally being said out loud. No. It happens on a Tuesday afternoon in October when the sky is the color of old pewter and the air smells like dried leaves and wood smoke from somewhere down the block, and you reach into your purse for your house key and the key does not turn. You try it again. You angle it differently, the way you do when you think maybe the tumblers are just stiff from the cold, or maybe your grip is off, or maybe you are just tired from the drive and not paying close enough attention. You turn it left, then right, then left again, the way you have done for 23 years without thinking about it. Nothing gives. The lock has been changed, and no one told you. And you are standing on your own front porch with 2 bags of groceries cutting into your wrists and your purse digging into your shoulder, and the whole world has just quietly rearranged itself into something you do not recognize, though everything looks exactly the same from the outside. My name is Dorothy Elaine Watkins. I am 64 years old. I raised my son Marcus in that house. I painted the kitchen yellow 3 times before I got the shade right. The first time was too bright, almost aggressive, like sunshine that had not slept in a week. The second time was too pale, like sunshine that had given up on itself. The third time was finally right. A warm, honest yellow that made the kitchen feel like morning, even at 7 in the evening, when the light outside had gone blue and cold. I planted the rose bushes along the front walk the summer Marcus turned 7. The same summer his father walked out and left us both with a house that felt very large and a future that felt very uncertain. I tended those rose bushes through droughts and aphids and one particularly brutal winter that took 3 of them down to the roots, and I replanted what I lost, and the ones that survived grew stronger for having survived. I have earned every single square foot of that property with my own hands, my own tears, and 40 years of mortgage payments that I never missed. Not once. Not even the month I was in the hospital with my appendix and had to call the bank from a bed with tubes in my arm to arrange the wire transfer. That house is me. I am that house. And on a Tuesday in October, I stood on my own front porch and I understood, slowly, the way you understand things that are too large to absorb all at once. The way you understand them gradually, the understanding arriving in waves. That my daughter-in-law, Brianna, had changed the locks without telling me, without warning me, without giving me the most basic dignity of a conversation. I need you to understand something before I go any further, because this story is not what you think it is. It is not a simple story about a wicked daughter-in-law and a put-upon mother-in-law. I have watched enough of those videos, read enough of those comment sections, to know how this kind of story usually gets told. The mother-in-law is always the villain, hovering and controlling and unable to let go of a son who has grown into a man. Or the daughter-in-law is always the villain, ungrateful and territorial and impossible to please. And everyone picks a side before they are halfway through the first paragraph, and then they spend the comments defending their chosen side with the passion of people who have some version of this conflict living inside their own lives, inside their own families, and who are relieved to have a story that lets them feel clear about it. I am asking you not to do that today. I am asking you to stay with me and resist the comfortable clarity, because what happened in that house over the next 6 days changed every single thing I thought I knew about my family, about my son Marcus, about my daughter-in-law Brianna, and about the particular blind spots of a woman who believed, sincerely, without guile, that she was simply loving her family well. Brianna Elise Washington came into Marcus's life 4 years ago, and I want to be honest with you about my first reaction, because I am not proud of it. She was beautiful in the way that immediately makes a mother nervous, the kind of beautiful that does not need to announce itself or work for attention, that just exists in a room and rearranges all the oxygen, that makes you instinctively recalibrate how much space you are taking up without fully understanding why. She was 31 years old, A nurse practitioner at a community clinic downtown, smart enough to make you feel slightly behind in every conversation without ever being unkind about it. She read novels with small print. She had opinions about wine that she shared without pretension. She remembered the details of conversations you had weeks earlier and would reference them naturally, which is the mark of a person who actually listens rather than just waiting for their turn to speak. Marcus was gone on her from the first week. I could see it in the way he held his phone when he was texting her, like it was something precious and slightly breakable. I had not seen my son hold anything that carefully since he was a boy carrying fireflies in his cupped palms on summer nights, afraid to squeeze too hard and afraid to let them go. My nervousness about Brianna had nothing to do with who she was as a person. I want to make that absolutely clear, because it would be convenient for me to pretend otherwise, to tell you that I saw warning signs early and tried to voice them. And I promised myself when I started telling this story that it would not be a convenient story. My nervousness was entirely about my son, because Marcus had been broken before. His first serious relationship, when he was 24, had ended in a way that took him nearly 2 years to climb back from. He had given too much too fast to someone who was not ready to receive it, and when it fell apart, he fell apart with it. And I had spent those 2 years watching my son rebuild himself piece by careful piece. The way you rebuild a wall after something has knocked it down, carefully, without rushing, not entirely trusting that the new wall would hold the same way the old one did. So when I watched him disappear into this new love, the way a person disappears into deep water, when I watched him reorganize his entire life around the gravitational pull of this woman, I felt the old fear rise in me like water in a basement after heavy rain. Mothers do not stop being afraid for their children just because those children become adults and move out and get jobs and get married. No one tells you that part when you are pregnant, when you are making decisions about names and nursery colors and what kind of parent you want to be. You think there will come a point when you can exhale, when you can put the fear down and let it be someone else's job. There is no such point. You just find new things to be afraid of, in new shapes, wearing new faces. Brianna and I were never close in the way I had hoped for. And I will be honest about that too, because close is what I had hoped for from the very beginning, in a way I had never fully examined or admitted to myself. I had lost my own mother when Marcus was 10, a stroke, sudden, with very little warning, a Tuesday morning in March that I have thought about on every Tuesday since, and I had spent the years after her death grieving not only her, but the specific texture of the relationship we had barely had time to build into what I knew it could become. I had wanted a daughter the way some women want something they cannot quite name, something they carry around as a kind of private longing that they rarely say out loud because saying it out loud makes it sound like a demand. When Marcus fell in love with Brianna, some quiet part of me thought, here she is. Here is the person who will fill in that missing shape. And when the reality of who Brianna actually was, a private person, self-sufficient, not naturally effusive, careful with her affections in the way of someone who means it when she gives them, did not match the shape I had already decided she should fill, I told myself we were cordial and called it good enough. We were polite at family dinners. We texted occasionally, mostly to coordinate around Marcus's schedule or to figure out holiday logistics. She called me Miss Dorothy, which I had not asked for but accepted because it seemed to mean something to her, some form of respect offered in the only language she had available for it. I told myself a great many things that turned out to be comfortable untruths I had been telling myself to avoid a harder conversation. The harder conversation being, we have never really tried. We have circled each other politely for 4 years and called that a relationship, and neither of us has been entirely honest about what is actually happening between us, or not happening between us. They got married 18 months ago. Small ceremony in a garden on the east side of the city, on a Saturday in late May when the weather finally cooperated after a week of rain that had everyone panicking and reconsidering their venue choices. Brianna's family came down from Philadelphia. Her mother, Josephine, a retired school teacher with a warm handshake and a laugh like a bell. Her aunt Renee, who wore a hat with actual flowers on it and danced better than anyone else at the reception, including people 30 years younger. Her grandmother, 92 years old and sharp as a tack, who told Marcus at the reception that he had better treat her granddaughter right or she would find out about it. My sister Claudette flew in from Houston. My friend Patricia came with her daughter Simone. It was a good day. Marcus cried when he saw Brianna walk toward him, and I cried watching him cry. And for a few hours everything felt like the kind of simple, uncomplicated happiness that you cannot manufacture, no matter how hard you try. The kind that just descends on a day like weather, arriving when it chooses to. After the wedding, they moved into the house. My house. This was, everyone agreed, a practical solution. The housing market was brutal in a way that made even sensible people make uncomfortable compromises. And Marcus and Brianna were still in the early years of building financial security. And the house had more space than one woman alone needed. It made sense on paper. The thing about paper is that it does not account for the specific weight of daily life, for the way two people's rhythms either harmonize or grind against each other, for the slow accumulation of small moments that, individually, mean nothing, but collectively, over 8 months, can become the thing that breaks a person open. Here is where I have to be honest about something that I have spent a great deal of time deliberately not being honest about. The arrangement that seemed so practical from the outside was never really practical in the way that it needed to be, because 3 of us were living in that house, and only 2 of us were married to each other, and the third one, me, had never fully adjusted to the reality that the space she had managed and maintained and defined for 23 years was no longer exclusively hers. I had told myself I was adjusting. I had told Claudette I was adjusting. I had even told Marcus I was adjusting, and he had thanked me for it genuinely, with the relief of a man who wants very much to believe the things his mother tells him. But Brianna had to live inside the adjustment every single day, and she could see with great clarity the places where it was not real. I have a way of moving through a house that I did not know was a particular way until Brianna started living inside it with me. I rearrange things. Not dramatically, not furniture, but small things. The position of objects on counters, the way dishes are stacked, where certain items live in the refrigerator. I have opinions about where shoes should not be left and what temperature the thermostat should be set to at night, and how the towels in the bathroom should be folded. I cook without being asked, which in my mind is an act of love, and in someone else's mind might be an act of occupation, a quiet claim of territory dressed up as care. I offer suggestions about things that are not my business, gently, with good intentions, in the tone of someone who is trying to help and does not realize that the help has not been requested and is not, therefore, help. None of these things are malicious. They are the behaviors of a woman who has run the same household for 23 years and knows what works in it. But they are also, I can see now with the clarity that comes from having enough distance, the behaviors of a woman who never quite handed the house over, who kept one hand on the wheel even after the car had been given to someone else to drive. I did not know I was doing this. That is the truest thing I can tell you, and I need you to believe it. Not because it excuses anything, but because this story only makes sense if you understand that it is not a story about malice. It is a story about blindness. It is a story about what happens when a good person loves in a way that she has never had to examine, because the examination was never required of her, because the people she loved had always had room for her love exactly as it was, and so she never knew the room was finite. The Tuesday it happened, I had been at my sister Claudette's house across town for the weekend. She had come up from Houston for a visit, and we had spent 2 days doing the things that sisters do when they finally have unscheduled time together. Eating too much, watching old movies we had already seen 100 times, talking about our mother, talking about our childhoods, talking about the particular texture of being Black women in our 60s, what we had expected this season of our lives to feel like, and what it actually felt like, which were 2 meaningfully different things that we had never quite sat down to compare before. I drove home in the early afternoon, feeling settled and replenished in the way that time with Claudette always leaves me. I stopped at the grocery store on Harlow Street because I was nearly out of coffee, and there was nothing in the house for dinner, and I came up my front walk with 2 bags in my hands and my purse on my shoulder and I put my key in the lock, and nothing happened. I tried again, turning the key the way I always do, with a slight lift on the handle. Nothing. I tried a third time, more slowly, thinking maybe I was rushing, maybe the key had just gotten turned around in my purse. Still nothing. I knocked on the door, firmly, not frantically. No answer. I rang the bell. No answer. I could see Marcus's truck in the driveway where it always sat, and I could see Brianna's car parked at the curb, which meant they were both home, which meant this was not the result of a lock malfunction, not the result of a hardware failure or a stuck tumbler. This was a lock that had been changed. I called Marcus's cell phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called Brianna's. Same thing. I called Marcus again, and I set the grocery bags down on the porch steps, and I stood there looking at my own front door with the brass knocker I had bought at an estate sale 15 years ago and polished every month since. And I tried to think clearly, which was nearly impossible because what I was feeling was not clean, identifiable anger. Anger has a shape. Anger has a clear target and a forward direction. What I was feeling was the particular dread of someone who has just discovered that the story they were living was not the story they thought they were living. The particular vertigo of a gap between what she believed to be true and what is actually true. My neighbor Frances Annette Coleman has lived next door to me for 15 years. She knows everything that happens on our street before the people involved know it themselves. And she comes by this knowledge not through nosiness, but through genuine attention to the people around her, the kind of attention that is increasingly rare and that I have always been grateful for. Frances came out of her house about 20 minutes after I had been standing on the porch, and she walked over with the careful expression of a woman who has been watching something develop from a distance and who wishes very much that she did not have to be the one to explain it. She told me that she had seen a locksmith's van in my driveway on Sunday morning. She had thought about calling me. She had decided it was not her business. I thanked her. She looked surprised. She had expected me to be angrier than I was in that moment. I was not yet at anger. I was still in the stunned, disoriented territory that precedes anger, the place where you are just trying to understand the outline of what has happened before you decide how to feel about it. I drove to a coffee shop 2 blocks away. I ordered a latte that I barely touched, that went cold in front of me while I sat and looked out the window at people walking past on the sidewalk, people who had keys that worked in their locks and did not know how lucky they were. I called Marcus 7 more times over the next hour. On the 8th try, after more than an hour of sitting in that coffee shop with my untouched latte and my 2 bags of groceries on the chair beside me, he picked up. The first thing he said was not hello. The first thing Marcus said to me was, "Mom, I am so sorry. I was going to call you. I have been thinking about that sentence for 7 months. I was going to call you." It is one of the loneliest sentences in the English language when it comes from someone you love, because what it contains, underneath the apology, is the admission that they knew. They knew and they did not call. They made the choice, consciously or by passive inaction, not to prepare you for what you were about to walk into. Marcus had known since Sunday morning when the locksmith came. He had been home. He had watched Brianna arrange for the new keys to be cut, had taken one of those keys for himself, and then he had gone through Sunday afternoon and Sunday evening and Monday and Tuesday morning without calling me. He had been watching the clock on his own discomfort and telling himself he would get to it, and he had not gotten to it, and I had driven home and tried a key that did not work. I stayed in a hotel that night, and the night after, and the night after that. I know some people will find this dramatic. You have family, people will say. You could have called someone. You could have simply asked Marcus to let you in. I could have. I did not, and I want to explain why, because the reason matters to the honesty of this story. I refused to call Marcus and ask him to let me into my own house, because the act of asking felt like an acknowledgement that my position had changed, that I was now the person who needed permission to enter, the guest who requires an invitation. I was not ready to acknowledge that. It was stubborn, and it may have been unwise, but it was true, and this is the true version. Brianna came to the hotel on Friday afternoon. She did not call ahead. She got the hotel name from Marcus and drove there and asked for my room number at the front desk and came and knocked on my door, and I answered because not answering felt like choosing the small, bitter victory over the actual conversation. And I have lived long enough to know that the small, bitter victory is never worth what it costs. Though sometimes you have to be reminded of this at exactly the moment you most want to forget it. She sat down across the little table by the window. She looked hollowed out, not unkempt. Brianna is never unkempt, but hollowed out in the way that people look when they have not slept properly in days and have been carrying something too heavy for the carrying to be invisible in their face. She had her hands folded on the table the way someone does when they are trying very hard to hold themselves together in a controlled way. And she started talking, and I listened, and what she told me rearranged my understanding of the previous 8 months in a way that I am still adjusting to. She told me she had been waking up at 3 a.m, regularly, for 8 months. Not every night, but most nights, something jolting her out of sleep in the dark hours. Some low-level alarm that her nervous system had apparently decided to set on her behalf without asking her permission. She told me she had been lying in bed in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house, and feeling like she could not breathe properly inside it. She told me she knew. Intellectually, she was very clear about this distinction, because Brianna is a person who thinks carefully about the difference between what she knows and what she feels, between the rational understanding of a situation and the physical experience of it. She knew that it was my house, that I had every right to be there, that I was not doing anything wrong in any objective sense. And then she told me that none of that intellectual knowledge had made any difference whatsoever to her body, to her nervous system, to the part of her that was trying to build a marriage in a space that felt thoroughly permeated with someone else's history and someone else's claim. She told me about the laundry. 3 weeks before that Tuesday, she had come home unexpectedly early from a shift at the clinic. A patient had canceled, which almost never happened, and she had walked past the door to their bedroom and seen it was ajar. She pushed it open. I had been in there. I had gone in while they were both at work to drop off laundry I had washed for them, because I washed their laundry, which I had thought of as a kindness and had never examined more carefully than that. Their clean, folded laundry was stacked on their bed. I was gone by the time she came home, but the impression of me was there, the act of me being in that room, handling their intimate things, moving through the most private space in their home as though it were simply an extension of the rest of the house that I managed. She told me she stood in the hallway outside her own bedroom door and felt something give way inside her. Not dramatically. Just give, the way a structure gives when a load-bearing element has been stressed one too many times. She called her mother Josephine in Philadelphia and cried for an hour. Josephine, who had raised Brianna to solve problems methodically, told her she needed to figure out what she needed and ask for it clearly. And Brianna, who responds to being overwhelmed by making plans, started making a plan. The plan was the locks. She came to the locks the way someone comes to the only solution left when every softer solution has felt too frightening to attempt. She told Marcus. Marcus, whose instinct in every difficult moment is to make the people he loves okay, agreed. He agreed because Brianna was drowning and he could not watch her drown. He did not call me. She did not call me. And so I arrived home on a Tuesday afternoon and tried a key that did not work. I want to tell you about the conversation we had at that hotel table because it is the part of this story that I had to sit with for the longest time before I could understand it properly. I had spent 3 days building a very satisfying anger, the kind that has a clear moral architecture and a correct and incorrect side. I had called Claudette and told her everything in a way that cast me as entirely correct, and Claudette had agreed with me enthusiastically because that is what sisters are for. I had maintained that indignation carefully, like a small warm fire that I kept feeding, because the fire was warmer than what was underneath it. And then Brianna sat down across from me and started talking, and the fire went out. Not immediately. The way a fire goes out when the wood is damp, not with a dramatic extinguishing, but with a gradual subsidence, until what was left was something cooler and more complicated and much harder to hold on to than righteous anger. She told me that my goodness had a shape that she could not live inside. She said, "Miss Dorothy, you know how to love people by taking care of them. You know how to love people by being present. But I need to be taken care of by one person in this house, and I need his presence. And when you are here, your presence fills the space in a way that means his has to expand to hold both of you. And he is not big enough for both of you. And that is not your fault, and it is not his fault, but it is the truth." I have thought about those words every day since she said them. There is something I need to tell you about the days I spent in that hotel that I have not told you yet, and it is something that embarrasses me slightly to admit, but I think it matters. I spent part of that time on the phone with my friend Patricia, who is 67 and a retired social worker, and who has spent 40 years professionally untangling the ways that people harm each other while believing they are doing the opposite. I told Patricia the whole story, the lock, the hotel, the conversation with Marcus on the 8th call, and I told it the way I had been telling it all week, with me at the center of the injury as the person to whom a wrong had been done. Patricia listened without interrupting, which she almost never does. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she asked me, "Dorothy, when did you last ask Brianna how she was actually doing inside that arrangement?" "Not Marcus, Brianna." I did not answer immediately. I went back through the 18 months since the wedding, back through all the Sunday dinners and the holiday logistics and the occasional texts, and I tried to remember a conversation in which I had asked Brianna, directly, as a question about her experience and not as a social opening, how she was actually doing, how the marriage was going, how it felt to be building a life inside a house that someone else had already built a life inside of. I could not remember one. I could not find a single conversation of that kind in 18 months of living together. I had asked Marcus those questions, but I had not asked Brianna. Patricia let the silence sit there the way she always does, without rushing to fill it. When I finally said, "I don't think I ever did," she said, "I know. And I think Brianna knew you weren't asking. And I think that might be part of what she was carrying." I want to say something about Black motherhood because it would be dishonest to tell this story without saying it, and because I think it is relevant to anyone who recognizes themselves in it, regardless of their background. I grew up watching my mother hold things together that should have required 3 people. I grew up learning that a Black woman's love is expressed through doing, through being present, through anticipating needs and meeting them before they become requests. This is a form of love that is real and powerful, and that has sustained families through circumstances that would break other structures. It is also a form of love that can, without any malice whatsoever, make the people you love feel managed rather than cared for, make them feel occupied rather than held. Brianna told me my love had a shape she could not live inside. What she was telling me, I understand now, was that the shape of my love, built for a child who needed to be managed, who needed constant presence and anticipation and provision, had not changed as my son changed, had not adjusted as the people it was directed at adjusted, had not made room for the new life growing inside the old house. And the consequence of that inflexibility was a daughter-in-law lying awake at 3 a.m. in the home she was supposed to be building, unable to breathe. We made some decisions at the kitchen table on that Saturday. The first was that I would start looking for a place of my own. The second was that Brianna and I would start meeting for lunch, just the 2 of us, once a month. We have had 6 of those lunches now. The first was stilted. The second was better. By the third, we had talked for 2.5 hours and closed the restaurant. I have learned things about her childhood in Philadelphia that I never thought to ask about, and she has learned things about my mother that I never thought to offer. And we have discovered that we are both the kind of people who worry about the people we love in silence for too long before saying anything, which is apparently a trait that arrives through many different routes. I found an apartment in November, east-facing, A little balcony, smaller than I expected to be comfortable in. I changed my own locks 2 weeks after I moved in. A new deadbolt, new keys that only I have. I stood in the little entry of my new apartment and turned the new key in the new lock and stepped inside and thought, this is what it feels like to have a place that belongs entirely to you. Not because you have paid for it or grown roses alongside it or painted it the right yellow, because the only person who decides what happens inside it is you. And then I went to put the kettle on and made myself a cup of tea and sat on my east-facing balcony and watched the afternoon light and tried to feel as uncomplicated as the light was and almost succeeded. Marcus and I talk on the phone every Sunday morning now, a ritual we invented accidentally and then deliberately kept. He calls at 9, or I call at 9 if he hasn't, and we talk for 45 minutes to an hour. It is the thing I look forward to most in my week, and not because it is a replacement for what came before, but because it is something new, something that belongs to just this season of our relationship, built in the space that opened up when I stopped trying to fill the space with my daily presence. My neighbor Frances brought a pie the day after I moved out. She told me she was proud of me. She told me she had been watching from the beginning, and she was glad it had come out the way it did. I asked her what she thought of Brianna. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I think that girl was drowning and she did the one thing she knew how to do, which was get herself to the surface. I think she could have done it better. But I understand why she did it the way she did. I have been thinking about drowning since Frances said that. About the fact that when a person is truly drowning, they cannot think about who they might hit on the way up. The panic is too great. The need for air is too great. Brianna had been drowning for 8 months in her own home, unable to breathe inside the life she was supposed to be building, and she did the one thing she could think of to create a breath. 3 weeks ago, I had dinner at the house. Marcus made his grandmother Edna's oxtail recipe, the one I taught him when he was 17, that he has been making better than me for the last 10 years, though I did not admit that until this year. I sat at the table that has been mine for 23 years, in the kitchen painted the finally right yellow, and Brianna sat across from me and told me about a difficult patient she had seen that week, and I listened without trying to fix it or redirect it or insert myself into the center of it. Just listened. At the end, she said, that is the thing about this work. You carry some of them home with you. And I said, yes, I know. And she looked at me in the way that people look when they are surprised to be understood. When I got in my car to drive home, I sat in the driveway for a moment and looked at the house. The rose bushes along the front walk are doing well this year. One of the ones that the winter took down to the roots has come back stronger than before. Marcus told me that sometimes happens with roses. You think they are gone, and then the roots turn out to have been alive the whole time, and what comes back in the spring is sturdier than what went down in the winter. I am keeping that as a metaphor for all of us. I drove home to my east-facing apartment, poured a small glass of wine, and sat on my balcony in the dark, and felt something I can only describe as peace. Not the peace of everything being resolved, because this is a family, and families are never fully resolved. But the peace of something being honest. The peace of a story that is actually being told instead of maintained as a comfortable fiction that everyone agrees to uphold until it cracks, until someone arrives home with grocery bags and tries a key that does not work. The peace of knowing that what came after the cracking, the hotel, the Friday afternoon table, the Saturday kitchen conversation, the apartment with the east-facing balcony, was hard and necessary and worth it. This is what I want you to take from this story, whoever you are. The conversation you are afraid to have is almost always less damaging than the crisis you are building by avoiding it. The words that feel too hard to say are almost always gentler than the lock that gets changed. The silence that stretches too long. The October afternoon when you discover that the life you thought you were living has been quietly rearranged without you. Have the hard conversation. Have it imperfectly while crying, in pieces, with missteps and the need to come back to it. But have it. Silence costs more than honesty. It has always cost more, and it will always cost more, and the only reason we keep choosing it is because it feels cheaper until the bill arrives. If this story landed with you, if you are the mother who has been standing on the wrong side of a lock she did not know was coming, if you are the daughter-in-law who has been trying to find words for something that keeps slipping out of language, if you are the son who is tired of being the place where two loves collide, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Hit the like button if this meant something to you. Share it with someone who is avoiding a conversation, someone who is sitting inside a difficult arrangement and calling it fine. Subscribe if you haven't, because I am going to keep telling these stories truthfully, without making myself the hero and without making anyone else the villain. I will see you next week. I'm going to go sit on my balcony and watch the light come up.